right, Doug Duell, Burlington on the spot. That's my new thing.
Sounds good to me.
Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome, and I'm happy to be here. I'm kind of excited. I've told people many times I'm not a speaker, but boy, do I love to talk.
That's a good way to start it off.
I guess so.
Yeah, so what do we want to talk about today? I think we're going to cover, you want to start with introductions. How about that? Just your background history, how long you've been in Burlington, and then we can go from there into some other stuff.
Well, Troy, I came to Burlington, grew up went to high school in Goodland, Kansas. My dad was formerly a teacher and coach here at Burlington. We lived in Ruleton, so he drove back and forth here during his tenure. I went away to college, got my degree, got into the teaching coaching. That was one of my dad's rules, insistence that anybody who was going to come back to the farm needed an off-farm income. So anyway, I decided I kind of took to coaching. And so anyway, we ended up. This was my second job. First one was in Atwood, Kansas, for 3 years, coaching, teaching. Then the job came open in Burlington. I believe it was the fall of 1984, and so we moved here and began doing the head wrestling coaching, and that's kind of where I came from.
Gotcha. So you started out in Goodland, you started out farming, and then, right, or not farming, but you grew up on a farm.
I grew up on a farm, and at the time, my dad was kind of in the process of building a farm. Us boys and were the cheap hired labor, which is true in most farms back then. We got involved. I kind of get a feeling that this is going to lead into wrestling. Is that right, Troy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's what I want to talk about.
Well, so Dad was a wrestling coach here in Burlington. His background, for those of you who don't remember, was Ben Duell was my dad. He wrestled 1 year in high school and then went on to K-State where he's going to school. And he wrestled there, I think, a year and a half, maybe 2 years. But then he had to quit because he got a good job washing dishes in the lunchroom for 25 cents an hour. So if that, I am absolutely sure there are people out there young enough they cannot relate to that. But that's the way it was back in the late 40s, early 50s.
Gotcha. So you have a pedigree of wrestling then.
Well, yeah, so to speak. And so with Dad being a coach, I had a younger brother, Fred, who was a year younger than me, a little less than a year younger. Dad used to take us everywhere. He coached and went. He'd throw myself and my brother Fred out on the mat. We would do an exhibition match between us before matches. So that's how we kind of got acclimated to wrestle in front of people.
That's awesome.
But,
so how old were you when that happened?
6, 7, 8, maybe 9. We were pretty little. He also had several other Burlington kids around. Daryl and Bryce Monosmith, Gary Rhodes. I believe Mike Rock might have even been involved in that to some extent. But I always remember, I was just scared to death. He'd put us out there. And anyway, that's how we got acclimated to the competition. We didn't really start competitive, wrestling till I was in the 7th grade, unlike today.
Gotcha. When you say you were scared, it was just like being in front of all the people, or actually scared to go wrestle? Because you probably were wrestling your brother already a bunch, right?
It was just being out in front of people like that, And so anyway, that was we got an early start in that respect, and then we also got a lot of teaching, coaching at home, and we wore out a couple of living room rugs and broke a few end tables and that kind of stuff. And as we got older, I can remember almost every wrestling session ended up in some kind of a fight with a fist being thrown or an elbow in the back or something like that. I mean, and I know a lot of guys can relate to that, but back in that
But
day.
you know what? It's so important, right? Because my son Logan, who's just turned 7, he's been peewee wrestling, and I just think it's important because even when he was like 3 or 4, you start wrestling, roughhousing. Like, that's so important, I think, to at a young age to take that up. You know what I mean? It's just...
Well, my dad had a way of explaining. He says, one of the most natural things for little boys and girls, actually, at that age to do is he called it scuffling.
Right.
Scuffle. Well, you throw in a couple of moves, and now all of a sudden you have wrestling. And, I think you mentioned... I think it's important. We could get into a long discussion about when do you start, how soon do you start, and I think that what you mentioned, you are already rolling around with your son and doing stuff with him at home, not
right.
in a real, competitive manner. But I had a brother that was a year younger than me. I think anytime you see those situations and parents get them directed in the right direction, you see possibly some wrestlers that begin to, maybe have success a little earlier than others. But, that'd be a long discussion about what is the right age to start kids at. My thought on it in all the years I coached was I encourage parents to get their kids into wrestling and come to the practices. They're around other kids. It was a good social deal. They learned a little bit of wrestling. They got to be around their friends, their buddies.
Yeah.
Hopefully we made it fun for them. But in terms of competition, that's something, they said, well, when should we start taking tournaments? I said, well, I don't know if there's any cut and dried age. I think that, it's good if a kid wants to. I think you want to keep them hungry. They in other words, they want to do it. It's better to say, I want to go, and then you have to tell them, no, we can't this week because we got this and this to do, as opposed to, I don't feel like, right, you're going to go wrestle this weekend.
Right.
And we never really got forced to wrestle as kids. It was like there just wasn't anything else to do type deal. I like telling the story, so we were, of our stature, we weren't really built for basketball. However, any basketballs were around our house were always flat. And, we'd go out there and they made pretty good kickballs or dodgeball type to hit people with. But, how do you get that dang ball to bounce? I mean, we were little kids and, you'd watch, they were starting to have basketball on TV way back in the dark ages. And, I mean, how do they get those balls back? So I was like I was kind of a slow learner, but I was like 7th grade before I figured out, man, they put air in those things. And I got into 7th grade PE, and, man, those balls were bouncing all over every place. But anyway, that's we kind of got sort of, it wasn't like, hey, if you don't wrestle, you don't have a place to live or anything like that. That's just what we did and
right.
what the boys did,
Well, and I think even what the point I was making was that natural contact. Just because I noticed with Logan when he's like 4 or 5, and just the bond of just getting down and not even trying to coach him up to wrestling. I wrestled too, but not even with that in mind, but just that, you're just teaching them and they're getting to play with you and they're getting to get that contact and getting comfortable. Then they're going to roughhouse and then we're breaking stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and then my wife's like, great, you broke that, you knocked over this. And so I'm very familiar with that.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's kind of the way it was around our house. Now, I remember when growing up, my 2 boys, doing the same thing. And there were times, I look back, I probably got a little too rough. I mean, I probably knocked them around a little too hard on occasion. It was kind of like, I guess, what a mother bear does to her cub bears when they're, trying to teach them how to survive out in the wild. Maybe that's kind of a crude statement, but that's kind of the way it was. And so anyway, it's a good sport. I think there's a lot that can be learned from it. It's obviously an individual sport. You're going to get out what you want to, get out of it, what you put into it. It's not a sport where, unlike some of the factions in our country today that would like to make everybody equal. Everybody isn't equal.
Right.
There are strong guys and there are weak guys. There are, quick guys and slow guys. And everybody doesn't win all the time. And so, there are some lessons to learn in there, I believe, about real life. And I like to think that to some extent I was able to teach some of those things to the young men I worked with is through our program here at Burlington.
Oh, I'm certain of that. And like we talked about before we started the podcast, there's nothing like it. I mean, unless you've done it, it's hard to explain to somebody. I think that's what you said. How do you explain what it's like to go out in that match? Because it's just you. And I remember the fear, getting into it and it's one-on-one. And there were sometimes I was tall and lanky and I would leg ride, and there were just some guys that were big, because I was wrestling 160 or around that when I was a sophomore. And then I remember one guy was just a big, a little bit shorter, but very, very muscular, and he was pounding his head against the locker, and I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah.
And I was better conditioned. So
those kinds scared me too. They were pounding their head on the locker, man.
That's not even a joke. I mean, he really was. And I was like, ooh,
yeah.
this will be interesting. But so 7th grade is where you started competitive.
Actual competitive.
And then walk me through high school, and then let's get into where that went after that, into the meat of wrestling.
Well, I remember a little bit at junior high at Goodland High School, or at Goodland Junior High School. It was we were the Mustangs. I can't remember the name of the school. We just called it the junior high school. I went through there. And, a lot of these stories I'm telling you, I told my wrestlers because I thought they had some merit. So I remember as a 7th grader on the bus, we were on a bus ride over to Hoxie, Kansas. We were going to wrestle them in a junior high duel. And I'm sitting next to my a friend of mine. And I'm telling him, he says, yeah. I said, this is me speaking. I'm probably going to go undefeated this year because my dad's a coach. Well, I got my butt beat that very first match, and I was just devastated. And, I don't remember much about it except that I bragged about how good I thought I was, and then I got beat. That kind of humbled me right there. Another thing I remember about that junior high, I think I learned from that, but my 8th grade year, we were getting ready to wrestle Burlington in a duel, where my dad was the coach. So we competed. My dad coached against us. That was kind of a unique situation, and I think people got a little bit of a kick out of that. And I can tell you this, my dad never, he coached his kids to beat us. I can tell you that. He wasn't showing any favoritism. But I got beat out the night before in a ranking match. I lost a ranking match. And so I wrestled JV that match. And I remember my dad being pretty upset, it was, to him, it was a reflection on him, Anyway, that's what I remember about junior high. And we had, back in that day, Goodland was a pretty good-sized school. We probably had 75, 80 kids out for the 2 grades. I mean, it was a pretty crowded practice room. And I remember I wrestled 72 pounds 76 as a 7th grader, 92 as an 8th grader. And, those are just some things I remember.
That's a good memory.
Well, yeah, a few of the things I can remember. I haven't lost it all yet.
Right. And in high school, so what was your career in high school?
Well, so started off kind of the same way. So as an 8th grader, I'll back up a bit. As an 8th grader, I wasn't much of a basketball player, and I didn't get to play much. I just, didn't know, what was going on out there. And so 8th grade, my dad made arrangements, and I bussed up to the high school after our wrestling season was over, and I kind of hung around and got to work out with some of the high school kids, the high school practice, and the high school coaches allowed it. So then that freshman year, I start out the season with a ranking match with a kid that was a senior. And he beat me in a kind of a, what I still remember is a controversial match. That's coming from my side of the deal. Anyway, I got beat out. And again, it was the night before we were to wrestle Burlington in a dual meet against my dad. Well, my dad was a little upset at that. And so anyway, 2 times that happened in my career.
Wow.
Why that happens, I don't know. Maybe I didn't want to wrestle.
Yeah, psychologically.
I don't know. Who knows? I mean, I guess the psychologist can figure that one out. But I did come back the next week. We had another ranking match, and I won pretty decisively against this kid. In fact, I put him in a hold. It's called a crossbody ride guillotine. Now, people that don't know wrestling wouldn't understand that. But anyway, it wasn't anything illegal. It was just hard, tough wrestling. It kind of cracked some ribs, put him in a crunch, and basically he was out for the rest of the year. I mean, I just had gone out there to try to make a statement. So anyway, so then I'm on the varsity. I had no clue what being a state champion was or what that even entailed. I can't even say that was my goal. It was just a matter of, okay, we got another match this next week and go out there and wrestle the best I knew how, And so anyway, the season went on. I remember, I think I got about, I don't know what it was, a third of the way through the season. I remember my record was like, I don't know, 8-0, 9-0. I was doing pretty good, and I go up against a kid from Hoxie named Steve Pope, and you're gonna keep thinking I have a great memory because I remember all this stuff. But anyway, this kid was good. He ended up being a 2 or 3 time state champion in his own right. They were in a lower class, but we went against each other, and he drubbed me pretty good. And I do remember that vividly. It was a 10-point spanking, and I probably should have been pinned, but I squirmed just enough to keep from getting pinned. And I came off the mat, and I was just emotionally and physically exhausted. I didn't have enough energy to cry, which I thought I was supposed to do because I got beat. But anyway, long story short, I ended up going through the rest of the year undefeated, and I ended up winning a state championship as a freshman. And
wow.
I found out that there were several, or at least one for sure, guys from Goodland who had won state as a freshman. One of them happened to be a guy I remember named Norman House. He's a big farmer over in the Goodland area. Anyway, and I'd never met him or anything at that time. So I thought, okay. So, and I didn't realize that was necessarily that big of a thing.
It's a pretty big deal to win as a freshman.
My dad was, that was the other thing. So I was at 98 pounds. I was a pretty scrawny little dripping wet guy at that weight. There weren't very many juniors and seniors at that weight, obviously, at that low of a weight. My dad did a very, maybe too good of a job keeping us boys grounded in the wrestling. It wasn't like we got to celebrate or feel real good about, we got a lot of coaching on what we need to do different and better and that kind of stuff. And it kind of worked for me, I guess you could say, because I didn't like it. I didn't want to listen to him, but after he left, when he was done talking to me, I would, think about it, and
he's right.
Maybe that'll work, But that was kind of my competitive nature. And so then I
one question on that. So did you have to go against Steve Pope again?
No, he was in a smaller class. They were if I'd had to, at that time, I don't know whether I could have beat. I don't know.
Well, it worked out the way it was supposed to.
Worked out, the way it was supposed to. I think he won state that year. He was a year ahead of me. He was a sophomore. We did meet again when he was a senior and I was a junior, and how would I say it? I beat him. Some people say you got revenge. I didn't look at that. I just knew I had a very good wrestler to wrestle. And
was that at state, or was that
that was just in a regular dual meet. So anyway, so I ended up going the next 3 years without a loss on my high school
Oh,
record.
man, I did not know that. I don't remember you telling me that. So,
well, I mean, it's not
so
like
sophomore, junior?
Hey, I don't have a tattoo on my shoulder or anything.
No, but I
saying
mean,
that.
that's a big deal. So, I mean, as a wrestler, I get that. So sophomore, junior, senior, undefeated?
Yeah.
Wow.
As I like to told people that that was a bad enough whipping, that one loss. That lasted me quite a while, Troy. And you know, I got to say that I'll be blunt with you. I feel like God blessed me with an unusual ability with wrestling ability, but to pick up moves and just, it was something that came pretty natural for me. And I'm not bragging. That's just the way it was. I picked up things that they seemed easy. And frankly, down the road, I had to learn in my coaching that everybody wasn't like that. There were certain things that needed to be worked on and drilled and taught that I basically took for granted. I just thought everybody knew how to do. So
right.
I struggled a little bit, you know, in my first 10, 15 years of coaching.
But I mean, being a 4-time champion, that's not just, there's got to be a little bit of intrinsic talent, obviously. And then you have the coaching with your dad and you have the will. So, because it's not going to just happen. I mean, you had the talent, like you're saying, the God-given, you were blessed.
Well, there were a lot of things that went into that, Troy. Number one, you got to have a little bit of luck. I got dozens of stories to tell you about luck. And I didn't get hurt. I should have been beaten probably 8, 10, maybe a dozen times. And
that were just close matches that you barely won? Or?
I had several, more than a few. I should have, like I used to tell people, I wasn't smart enough to know when I was beat. And so, yeah, there were plenty of – it wasn't like I beat everybody 30-0 or pinned everybody by any means. I just, you know, there were plenty of close matches for sure. And anyway, what I like to bring up in this day and age, what I think is, to me, is really interesting is that the difference now we have all this social media. And a kid wins his first match as a freshman in high school – I mean, everybody's already talked about him being a 4-time state champion, you know. And certainly if you win a championship as a freshman, then that gets brought up. And it's all over the, you know, Twitter. It's all over Facebook. It's all over the forums and the wrestling website, all over the newspapers. Well, back then, as I like to remember, so I win that 4th title, and everybody's saying, well, are you the first one? Has anybody else ever done it? Well, I sure as heck didn't know. I didn't. And so I remember somebody said, well, we may have to call the Wichita Eagle Beacon, or we may have to, how can we look in this? We may have to call the Kansas Activities Association.
Right.
Nobody knew. If I remember correctly, I didn't, and I don't know that I was ever formally told or ever found out. I think I was down in college my freshman year when somebody called and said, they had an article said they've discovered you were the first 4-timer. Well, see, it took that long. Nowadays, it wouldn't, you know. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I'd have been mentally tough enough or to be able to, you know, handle what the press would have done, you know, as I got ready to go in my senior year as a 4th one or whatever. I mean, they make a big deal. You read a lot of press clippings about how good somebody is if they're getting ready to go over their 4th and where they're going to college and all this stuff. So, there was a lot. And the other thing I was a recipient of is in my 4 years of high school, our team won state twice and got second twice. We had a pretty darn tough practice room. In fact, it was one of those kind that we couldn't wait to get to a competition because we knew it was going to be a lot easier what we were seeing in our own practice room. It was just one of those deals. We had a bunch of studs in our practice room, and I can relate to that in coaching. The years we had good teams, we had really tough kids, really good kids, and enough of them, you know. And so, you know, a lot of things lined up. And to help out with that.
That really is something. I mean, to be the first one in Kansas to win 4 titles.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just
I
saying.
guess it, I guess it
that's-
has to be. I mean, I don't. Somebody had to be the first one. I don't. I don't know why it was me or why it.
Well, and I
just the
think
way
it's
it
funny
worked
because
out.
you don't even find out until you're a freshman wrestling, right, at college.
And that was due to the times.
The times, but I
Yeah.
mean that's a big deal because you
Yeah.
come back and then you find out, I was the first person to ever do
But
this.
it wasn't like I ever got to bask in that glory because I was already in college
Right.
wrestling at Oklahoma State, and I can tell you so many stories. I mean, in my mind, I remembered that I was maybe pretty good coming out of Goodland High School, and I'm going down to Oklahoma State. Well, I didn't make that really make that correlation, that jump, and I wasn't like afraid or anything. I just didn't have any idea. I remember walking in the very first day of the practice to the practice room, and there's this guy over there, and I don't remember who it was now. He says, "Hey, you that 4-time state champion from Kansas?" And I'm, "Yeah." He says, "Come on over here. Let me see what you got."
Oh.
And it was like I got tossed from one end of the practice room
Really?
to the other. And I also remember that I was probably good 2 months into practice that freshman year before I scored a point.
Whoa.
And I scored a point because the kid I was wrestling got a little rough, and he kind of drilled me into the padded wall. I mean, kind of a nasty move. And coach says, I can't remember, he says, Jake says, "That's illegal. You can't do that. 1 point, Duell. There's your first point." And
That's how you got the first
that's
point,
how I got. Yeah, I mean that's the truth. And I wanted to quit really bad.
Whoa,
Oh, I
okay.
wanted to quit. I wanted to give up. I remember calling my mom and on the phone.
4-time state champion, and you were.
Well, you got to understand though, and I found this out later when I got there. I mean, 4-time state champions in a practice room like that at any of these top universities, they're a dime a dozen. They're just all over the place. And now they're just, and there were 3-timers and 2-timers all over the place. And that practice room was like a state championship match every single time out.
It was
I mean,
the best
one of the best, one of the
so.
best in the country. Top 5 perennially for the most part. And I remember calling my mom. I said, "Mom, I want to come home. I want to quit." She says, "Why do you want to do that?" And I said, I'm just tired. I'm not doing any good. These guys are kicking my butt. I'm getting beat all over the place." She says, "Okay." She says, "Maybe you ought to talk to your dad about it." And she acted like she's getting ready to hand him the phone. I said, "No, Mom, I tell you what, let me call you back later."
I got to go.
I got to go. I wasn't about to bring that up with my dad. He wouldn't have taken to, he'd have probably said something like, "Go ahead, but find another place to live and find a job," And I wasn't
Right.
quite ready to do that. And thank goodness, my dad wouldn't have. I don't even know if he ever knew I wanted to quit. I don't know if Mom ever told him or not. Probably not. But thank goodness they didn't let me, because even though it didn't turn out the way I wanted, the way I dreamed it would, what I learned down there, I carried with me the rest of my life. It was an experience
Of
that I
course.
wouldn't trade for anything. Those are some of my best friends, my old wrestling teammates.
Well, 2 questions about that came to mind. The coach that you had in Goodland, how was that comparable to your dad? I mean, did you pick up a lot from the Goodland in high school, or I mean, who was the coach?
The coach there was Rocky Welton, and anybody in this area that knows anything about wrestling will remember that name. He was an outstanding coach. He probably won 8 or 10 total state team championships.
Wow.
I can't remember the for sure number. I know he won 3 in Goodland, I think. He then went on to Garden City, where he won a whole batch of championships.
Wow.
What I remember, and by the way, Rocky just passed away not too long ago. I remember that his strength wasn't technique. He was very, very basic in his instruction. And my dad used to take my brother Fred and I everywhere he went to wrestling clinics. When they do their yearly clinic, he'd take us there up here in Aurora, Colorado, is where they had it every year. Okay. And we'd go to that, and I picked up lots of stuff going to those. Now, that's how we had to learn back then, because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have videos, we didn't have, social media. I mean, nowadays you can get on YouTube. If you plug in a move you want to learn, you can. I mean, good grief, what tools kids have these days to learn. Yep. There's no excuse for not learning something.
Sure.
So I would find something and learn something, or Dad would teach it to us, and I'd come back to our practice room in Goodland, and I'd want to, I guess that's where I got my coaching in. See, I wanted to show my coach, I wanted to show all the other kids. Well, Rocky was a little bit, no, wait a minute here. I'm the coach, you're not type D. And what he didn't like me, he just, I guess, didn't want his authority being threatened or whatever. And he used to have this quote that he'd say stuff like, I don't want anybody using any of that junk wrestling stuff, that junk move stuff. Well, and I pretty much believed it, except that I learned later on that the only difference between a good move and a junk move is whether it works, If it works, it's a good move, And so my philosophy got adjusted along the way too. But I remember that, and he really didn't like me coming, wanting to try to show other kids moves or stuff, And I just, that's what I like to do. Probably the thing I like the most. I just loved showing wrestling moves, wrestling technique, and actually, that was a detriment for quite a while in my coaching. I wanted to show too much. I wanted to show everything I knew, and that wasn't a good. I mean, it just kids' mind exploded. They didn't.
Yeah, too much to bite off.
Too much, and we need to focus on a few different things. So the coaching was an evolution, and I've told many people it took me probably 15 years to figure some things out, maybe more, and I wasn't a very good coach early on. I knew a lot about wrestling, and I could show moves, I could teach moves, technique, but I didn't know a lot about coaching. I didn't know how to coach. That took a long time to figure out.
To figure out how to. Yeah. Gotcha. Well, and then my other question that I was going to ask is, at what point in your high school career did you start thinking, hey, I'm going to use this to go to the next level? I mean, was it after two, 3 championships you started thinking, hey?
No. So part of that story is that as my dad had 2 state championship teams here in Burlington, and we need to talk about the Burlington program overall. I don't want this to be just about me.
We will.
I was, I guess part of the Burlington program, but the Duell has a history there where my dad coached for so long. Anyway. I forgot what we were talking about.
Well, I just wanted to know, you get to be a junior or a senior, and you're like, hey, I'm going to go to one of the best wrestling programs in college.
My dad had 2 kids that were a year older than I was, Doug Thompson and Daryl Monosmith, both very good high school wrestlers, and both of them had some accomplishments at the senior level on the national level.
At Burlington.
But, going to junior national tournaments in the summer, that kind of stuff. So they got recruited by Oklahoma State. And so that was a natural kind of a fit for me to, I just wanted to go down there. I had opportunities to go elsewhere. I could have gone to CU. I could have gone to Iowa State, could have gone to K-State. And people are going to look at me, hear this and think I was an idiot. I probably was. I was scared to go on recruiting trips. I was kind of an introvert. I was a shy kid at that age. I didn't go on my recruiting trip to Iowa State because in my mind I thought that the coach at the time, Harold Nichols, I thought they would get me up there and they'd keep me there. They wouldn't let me come home unless I signed. I mean, that's how naive I was. I mean, I was just
you don't know what you're doing.
I'm just a Western farm, Kansas farm kid, Troy. I mean, I was naive about a lot of stuff. And anyway, I come my senior year, and Coach at Oklahoma State kind of started contacting me, but even then it wasn't a full-fledged recruiting trip. And I never even went down there on a recruiting trip. He just basically, I wanted to go there, so I signed the deal. Nowadays, kids will, and it's probably smart of them, but they'll milk it. I mean, if they're allowed 3 or 4 recruiting trips, they're going to take them to their max. And
right.
You know what? They go on these trips. They learn things. They meet new kids. They make friends. I mean, that's just the way the wrestling community is.
Right.
I didn't do that. I kind of had, if I had to do it over again, I would have. I remember my dad telling me one time, or maybe I heard him talking to somebody, when he wrestled at K-State, he remembers going to meets and watching Oklahoma State wrestle and just being like awed. And he said, I told myself that if I ever have sons that can wrestle in college, they're going to go to Oklahoma State.
Oh, okay.
And so there was no pressure from him to do that at all.
Right.
And I came along at a good time. I was fortunate. Troy, back then, NCAA Division I wrestling was giving out 20 to 23 or 4 full scholarships. Now they are down to 9.9. Mm. So I got lucky. I was able to get a full scholarship. That was for 5 years. I got all my college paid for. I had to pay for, I think, one semester because I was.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's lucky.
I took my time.
You earned it. I mean, it was fortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I did earn that scholarship. Yeah, I mean, I'm still earning it because I got aches and pains. I mean, just from, but anyway, it was a worthwhile experience. I'm glad I didn't come out of college with a bunch of debt. But yeah, I sure worked for it. But times have changed. I mean, the scene, the college sports scene was totally different then than it is now. I mean, now it's pretty much a 12-month out of the year job. Back then it was 5-6 months at the most.
Yeah, it's like a career.
Yeah,
when you go over there now.
Yeah, I mean, they keep tabs on you. We had one of the most unclean wrestling rooms in the country, and here we were, one of the top universities to wrestle.
Weird.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I mean, if people went down there, it was just disgusting, but that's where it was. That's what we did, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't. Nowadays, kids will go, and a lot of times the fanciest workout facility attracts them, and they're spending millions of dollars on all kinds of sports facilities, not just wrestling. It's big money.
You have to keep up and compete and recruit.
Yeah. So I didn't decide. I mean, it wasn't. I guess it. I remember thinking, well, just what you do. You go on to college. You wrestle.
On full scholarship.
Yeah. And that didn't really hit me either. I didn't really know what that meant.
It's a big deal.
Nowadays, I think there is not anything such as a full scholarship, because coaches, as you understand, if there's 9.9 full scholarships to give that the NCAA allows, they have to use those, and there are 10 varsity spots to put on the mat. So they break those up in all kinds of different ways. And they do all kinds of things, like Pell Grants and trying to find what kids can get money doing, or maybe their parents qualify or their family or something. So it's quite you have to be quite an accountant as a head college coach these days.
Yeah, it's changed. So did you wrestle all 4 years in college?
I did. I would say, in a nutshell, I had an illustrious career. My freshman year, I went down there. I had no clue what I was doing. I lost a close ranking match. They used to be a really big deal for colleges to have their opening of their season would be what they'd call for ours would be the orange-black match. And they'd match up kids, maybe the top 2 guys that were in the weight, and have them go against each other. Now you don't see that as much anymore. They don't seem to do it. And it was usually 5,000 or 6,000 attendance, which, Oklahoma State usually drew big crowds down.
I bet.
And this was just for basically the tryout match.
Wow.
Okay, and so anyway, I lost that match real close. The next week, the kid that beat me, and he was a runner-up the year before in the Big 8 tournament. So, he wasn't any slouch. He twisted his ankle real bad and was out like 3-4 weeks. And so that pushed me into the slot. That was at 126 pounds. When I went down there, I was planning on wrestling 118. And I think I maybe got down to 119 and a half one time. And then this scenario happened, and good thing, because I'd have probably been dead trying to make 118. I just, man, it was too much, yeah. And anyway, so I ended up being the varsity 26-pounder at the time. They didn't have anybody else to put in there. I mean, I guess I kind of won it by default because this kid got hurt. So then he came back, and the rule was the challenger had to win 2 in a row. Well, he was challenger. He could never beat me 2 in a row, so I kept the varsity spot all year. And I got third in the Big 8 tournament that year. It was a Big 8 back then. And then I went to nationals, and I got 4. I won 4 and lost 2, and was in the whisker being a legitimate All-American. But then at the end of the year, the coaches, they have this deal, which they still do, and I got voted by the coaches across the country to be on the freshman All-American team. And so I think I don't even remember if I got a plaque or not. If I did, I couldn't find it. And then the next year, I call it, and I'm just giving a history of what happened. I got kind of a snub year. They had a kid coming back who had been injured in a car wreck the year before. His name was Billy Martin. He was from Virginia. He was good, but he sat out a year, recovered from his car injuries. He was second in the national tournament 2 years before. And we wrestled, and I think he won a couple of different matches by point, real close. Wow. And so then basically what happened, and this is another, as I look back, I was just naive. I didn't understand. I was dumb. I mean, I just wasn't very smart. The coach asked me, and I'm going into pretty in-depth. This may or may not interest people, but he asked me, he says, he brought me, he says, what do you want to do? And, when I tell this story to my old wrestling buddies, they all laugh, because you'd have to have been there and know the scene, who the coach was and all this. And I said, well, I just want to do what's best for the team. That's kind of the way I was brought up. Well, in reality, what I should have done, I should have taken a redshirt year. I should have redshirted, because this guy, they're not going to leave a NCAA runner-up off the team.
Right.
Even though he wasn't as good as he used to be because of his car injury. Well, long story short, coach, and maybe the coach should have made that decision. I don't know. I didn't know what a redshirt meant. Mm-hmm. Here's what I thought it meant, Troy. I thought it meant that if I said, yeah, I'd like to redshirt and get ready for next year, that meant I was saying, well, I'm scared of Billy Martin and I know I can't beat him. That was stupid, but that's what I thought. And so anyway, I ended up wrestling like 6 matches that year and burning my red shirt. So, it is what it was.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I come back, and the next year, between that sophomore and junior year, I had I tore up my knee in a summer freestyle tournament in Parsons, Kansas, and I spent that year trying to adjust and figure out how to wrestle with a bum knee, and it all kept going out on me all the time. And so I ended up that year, being picked over to wrestle at the end of the year. I wrestled in and out, and they had another kid that they wanted. Basically, the coach wanted him to wrestle. Mm-hmm. That's who he wanted. This kid had never made 126. So we have a ranking match, and I win the ranking match. I still remember. I won it 7-1. I mean, some things just stick in your mind. Yep. Well, the coach makes a decision that he wants the other kid to wrestle. It didn't matter the ranking match. Now, that's not an uncommon scenario in college. Coaches are under the gun to win. They're going to do what they, can do to put the best that they think. So anyway, and I was cutting weight pretty hard. So when he told that, I just said, heck with this, man. I'm done for the year. And I went and found something to eat and something to drink because I was hungry and thirsty. I probably gained, 2 days later, I get a call from one of my teammates. Says, "Hey," he said, "we can't find this other kid. He skipped town." He says, "Can you make weight?" This was like 3 hours before the turn. We were weighing. I go, "What are you talking about? I'm probably 20, 15, 18 pounds over at the time." And long story short, this kid couldn't make the weight, so he basically disappeared and crawled in the hole.
Man.
So we went to the NCAA. We went to Big 8 and the NCAA tournament without a 126 pounder. We only had 9 guys instead of 10. We lost the NCAA tournament that year by, I think, 6 points. To Iowa won it, and Iowa State was second. And by the way, for anybody that's listening and remembers wrestling back then, that was the same year that Daryl Monosmith upset Frank Santana in the finals of the Big 8 tournament, and he was declared the outstanding wrestler. It was one of the biggest. They claim that might have been the biggest match in Oklahoma State history. It won Oklahoma State the Big 8 tournament that year. And
what year was this? Do you remember?
That would have been in 1978.
Man, that's a story, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a big story.
So they took third? Oklahoma State?
They took third in the NCAA tournament.
In the NCAA, not even the Big 8.
The Big 8 they won.
Holy
because
smokes.
of Daryl Monosmith. Now, Daryl,
and I get that, but I mean, they took third, and that's missing a 126 pounder that could have been there if that decision wouldn't. I mean, I'm not, not reliving history.
But I've relived it plenty of times.
Yeah.
And I did back then. I've let it go a long time ago. I had to, but
well, thanks for sharing that.
I'd like to think that I could have won maybe 2, maybe even 3 matches. That would have been the 6-point difference,
right?
Maybe. I don't know. Who knows what the draw would have been? I mean, there's so many things.
Like you said, it is what it is, but that's a story.
That's a piece of Burlington history. Daryl was a Big 8 champion. He was the outstanding wrestler. A lot of publicity over that. He was a 2-time All-American. Doug Thompson never quite made it at that level. But Daryl was, he was good. And Santana was a defending national champion. That's what made it even bigger, that when he upset this guy.
Wow.
So, it was big stuff.
Quite a year.
They claim, if anybody's ever read the stories, they claim that, so the arena where we had this, it's called Gallagher Iba. Hank Iba was a famous basketball coach from Oklahoma State, won 2 national championships back in the 40s. That was Henry Hank Iba. Ed Gallagher was a famous wrestling coach that won numerous NCAA championships, and which, by the way, Oklahoma State has the record right now. They have won 34 NCAA wrestling championships. Now, none since like 06 or 07, I believe. So they're in a little bit of a drought, but you've got programs like Penn State and Iowa and Ohio State who have really stepped up their game and are winning things right now. Anyway, I had to throw that in because that's part of the Burlington story when it comes to wrestling.
So through that whole process, you were studying to get your teaching license? Or
not through the whole process. I started out, when I went down there, I had no clue what I was going to do. Somebody asked me what I was majoring in. This is another one of my stupid sayings. I would say, I'm majoring in 4 years and get out. I had no clue what I was doing. I just thought all there was in the world was
You had to pick something.
Well, I had to pick something. So I started out in general ag.
Okay.
My first class as a freshman was 6:30, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the morning.
Ooh, that's early.
I wasn't real good at getting to class, and so I fell behind rather quickly, and it wasn't an easy class. So I think, I don't remember, it was that semester or the next one, I changed my major to get into education. I thought, so I was thinking, okay, my dad had kind of told me that, if you want to be a teacher, if you want to be a coach, you're probably going to have to be a teacher. Back then, that was pretty much a given. If you were going to coach, you had to be a teacher to go along with it. You just didn't see a lot of people coaching that were not teachers.
Right.
That was just kind of that went with the territory. That's the way it was. So And I thought, well, you know, I didn't think VOAG, my dad started out as a VOAG teacher in Overbrook, Kansas. I didn't think I wanted to be a VOAG teacher. I thought playing games sounded fun, and being in a big classroom. I don't think I could have survived just being in a classroom and having to talk all day long and sit down. And so anyway, that's where it ended up. So I majored in health, physical education, recreation, and that's how I got into that deal and ended up doing. I actually taught school for 28 and coached for 32.
At Burlington?
Not all at Burlington, no.
So did you know you were going to come back here, or how did that work out?
You know, I went to several interviews in Oklahoma. One in Wagner, Oklahoma. One in Stillwell, Oklahoma. And I would have probably, if I'd have done that, I'd probably end up being a Bassmaster fishing champion or something, because at that time I loved to fish. And
I didn't know that.
But
cool.
but I had this draw. I just for some reason I wanted to get back to home to get involved in the farming, and I had I'll be honest, I had no idea where that was going to lead.
Right.
And I'm still not 100% sure I can tell you where it's going to lead. I'm just going. I mean,
Yep.
I don't know. I didn't know at the time. I sure never dreamed I'd be where I was at right now. It's like I told my wife the other day, Sunday was our 40th anniversary. And
congratulations.
So in the morning I said, so somebody was asking me that, and I said, well, so I asked Kim, I said, did you ever think that after I kissed you that first time that this is where we'd be 40 years from now? And she says, no. So, I mean, anyway, you just you got to do some things on faith. You got to,
Sure.
like I told kids many times, you don't have to necessarily know everything you're going to do, or especially when I had seniors getting ready to go off to college or whether, I said, you don't know what you're going to do? That's fine. But I can tell you this, if you get up every morning and get out of bed and put one foot in front of the other, things are probably going to turn out all right.
Yeah.
A simple thing like that.
Sure.
I mean, I wasn't trying to preach or, but you never know. We don't know what's going to happen from one day at a time. Yeah, you got to look ahead. You got to have, I think, dreams. You got to have goals. You got to, my goals in coaching, I wanted to have state champions. I wanted to have state champion teams. I wanted to help kids, reach their fullest potential. And like I told you, early on, probably the first 10, 15 years, my focus was on, I thought in order to be a good coach, you had to win state championships and have state champions. And that's all I wanted. And that was, for me, that was pretty selfish, I see now. And once I started, I went to I heard it twice that year. Once at a coaching clinic, and then once at the beginning of the year teaching. We have a meeting at the beginning, and they'd usually get somebody come in and talk to us, and our superintendent would say a few words and whatever. And the saying was this, kids will never care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that really hit me between the eyes, and so, and I don't remember what year that was, but I started trying to do a little bit more about, trying to find out and figure out and be a little more sensitive to what kids were dealing with, what they're, that understanding that their life wasn't all just about 2 hours in a practice room,
Right.
Now, I did say, look, I said, guys, I know we all got different things going around on. I said, when you're in here for an hour and a half, 2 hours, I mean, this is where your focus got to be. I know it can be hard sometimes. It's hard for me sometimes. Guess what? I don't want to be here today. And I'm telling you, too, you know where I'd like to be? I'd like to be out calling in a coyote and shooting it. But I said, I'm not. I'm here in the practice room because this is what I got to do. This is what I'm committed to doing. And so, when I started getting real, I think, with kids, and I struggled early on because, numbers is pretty important around. You got to have at least one workout partner for every kid. I mean, ideally. Now, that's not always going to be the case. So then sometimes you have to get creative. But, you know, I used to, man, I'd go in and talk to Bill Farnsworth or Ray Rhodes, who were two of my mentors that I just thought the world of. I mean, those guys were good. It's hard to find those kind anymore. And anyway, they, you know, I'd used to moan and groan about how can I get more kids out? What do I need to do different? Do I need to, you know, give them $100, come out? I mean, how do you get more kids out? And so I'd talk with one of my friends was helping me coach that year, Bryce Monosmith, and Gary Rhodes too, who were former state champions here at Burlington.
Right.
And you know, we'd say, well, why did we wrestle? We would always come off on this. Well, what made wrestling so fun? And I used to, you know, with kids, they wouldn't come out or they would come out and quit. I would take it personally. I'd get angry at them, like, you know, I'd take it personal.
You do it, yeah.
Yeah, you just need to suck it up and be tough, you know. Well, I found out later, you know, that was a wrong approach, number one, because when I'd get, you know, angry and upset and it'd be like carry a grudge again, to be like, you know, that's shutting the door. They may change their mind next year, you know, type deal. And so as we would talk, you know, Bryce came up with, well, I don't know that it was so much that it was so fun. But back then it was a lot more fun than what we were going to have to do if we went home after school, because our dads had something for us to do. Yep. His was, I know, cleaning out the cattle shed, all the hay and the manure and stuff, and that wasn't fun, and it wasn't real easy work. And so, you know, we dug in a little deeper. Well, what was fun about wrestling? Geez, well, winning is fun.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a fun practice? Not that I can remember.
No.
Wrestling is a tough sport. It's not like you can go out and you know, with basketball. And don't get me wrong, I don't knock basketball. There's a lot to be learned there. In fact, when I coached junior high football, I used to make many references to Michael Jordan, because I just really admired what he had done and how he'd done it and intensity. But, you know, what are you going to, I lost my train of thought again. What was I talking about, Troy? I got
Michael Jordan and just,
but
I think you were talking about how tough wrestling was. And
well, it's you can go out, you can say, hey, you know, Troy, you want to go, come over tonight, we'll go shoot a few baskets. You know, and Bryce Monosmith, or, no, Gary Rhodes used to always bring this up, and that's okay, we'll go shoot a few baskets. But nobody comes in and says,
hey,
Troy, you want to go shoot a few takedowns? No, I think I'm good here on my easy chair type deal.
Not unless they're really
and you know, it's you got to be a little messed up in the head to want to do that kind of stuff. And as a wrestler, and usually wrestling, you don't play wrestling. I mean, it's hard not to want to rip the other guy's head off or come out on top, you know.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it was a lot. So once I started, you know, facing the reality, well, I had to figure out how to make wrestling fun. Well, how do you do that? I mean, you can't make kids win, you know. So it for me, it became about encouraging kids more and building them up no matter what.
That's
no
awesome.
matter what. Yep. And then when my two sons came through wrestling, the program, it really opened my eyes. And still, I was pretty stubborn, because I grew up in an era where you win because you work harder than the other guy, or you work longer. Well, that meant you have longer, harder practices. And I found out that could be detrimental. You know, kids don't want to work longer and harder than anybody else. I mean, there's a time and place for everything, but they can't do it 7 days a week. Just like you and I can't work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We'll burn out. We can't do it. Mm-hmm. And so, anyway, and you know, I used to tell people, you know how hard it is. And it took I don't know, maybe what would you call it, a soul searching or a discovery of my own self.
An epiphany.
That yeah, there is more to wrestling. There is more to sports than just winning. Is winning important? Absolutely.
Sure.
You don't go out there to lose.
Right.
You go out there to win, but you got to learn how to keep things in perspective. And that was part of my job to do that. I hadn't done a very good job of that early on. I loved it when kids win. I hated it when they lost. And it's like, oh, why couldn't you win type deal. That's kind of the way I was brought up. That was just that era, I guess. And so anyway, do you know how hard it is to encourage a kid, give him encouragement, walking off the mat when he got pinned in 11 seconds?
Yeah, because it happened to me
That's
a few
hard.
times. Yeah, I do.
And there are things you can say, there are things you can say.
No, it was upsetting. I look back and like you were talking about, I mean, when I was wrestling, those practices weren't something that we were looking forward to every day.
No.
They were rough.
No.
They were 2 hours of you're in there or we're running through the halls. They were tough practices, but then you get older and you look back on that and it's life-changing. And so that's, for me, I look back and it was the best thing ever. And then what I remember that was the most fun was winning. The matches, like I was telling you, of the one kid that was from Hinckley, he was smashing his head against, and I outlasted him and pinned him with like 10 seconds left. And that bus ride, I remember the bus ride home.
Yeah.
I remember how we were high-fiving, and I'll never, and I've told my son, I'll never forget that match.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever be like that. So I totally understand what you're saying.
So another quote that came to mind I read somewhere, and it's don't ever let anybody tell you that winning is not more fun than losing.
That's right.
Because it is.
It is.
But
I get the greater good of what you're saying, and these kids, and we can talk about today. I mean, you coached for that many years, and a lot of those kids, that's a safe haven for them after school. If you think about it, especially now, that's with sports that's going on right now. Not to get into all that, but you just worry because a lot of these kids right after school, they're doing sports not only from a place to be outside of family, but away from technology. They're not watching YouTube, which we're on. They're actually out there building relationships with teammates. They're going through it. So I worry about that if we're not going to have sports this fall.
Well, you're exactly right. And it's not only good exercise. I mean, if that's all you wanted to look at, it'd be a win situation.
That alone. Yep.
One of the things I remember, too, is I had to come to the grips with I wanted everybody to want to be a state champion. Mm-hmm. Well, everybody didn't. I'm not going to say everybody didn't want to be a state champion, but everybody didn't want to work that hard. And that wasn't any, negative to it. That's just the way it is. That's the fact. I'll be honest with you. I'd love to be a millionaire, but I don't think I want to work hard enough at my age to be a millionaire. I mean, I am what I am now. And I would have said that probably 30, 40 years ago too. I mean, I faced that. That's like, it'd be great to be a millionaire if somebody gives me $1 million, but I don't want to work 10 times harder than, I was working hard. I just wasn't doing the kind of work that was going to make me a millionaire. But, those kind of things I had to come to grips with. And I think sports are so important for our kids. They're important to our society, to our country. And we're seeing that now. And you said we weren't going to get into that, but it's kind of hard not to.
We can get into anything we want.
Is it the only thing? No. But I think that sports and activities, not to say just sports, but activities, all activities, your band, your music, all that stuff is good for kids. I mean, for crying out loud, I'll tell you something people don't know. I was in Greg Halligan, the music teacher here for many years. We had a deal over in Goodland. It was called the Expressos. It was the elite singing group. And I was in that, and I was pretty proud of being in that. I loved singing a group. I did not like singing solos, and I had a couple of those, and man, I would have rather, well, I won't tell you what I'd have rather done, but that was not,
See?
And I just didn't, and I wasn't.
Were you state champion at that?
No. I wasn't. I wasn't a. I suppose I don't know. I was good enough to make the squad or whatever he called it. But
that was in high
Greg
school.
Halligan was in that with me. He was a year younger, and
that's cool.
My brother Fred was. We had a lot of athletes in there, but yeah, I never. I do remember as an 8th grader, I took a solo to this music contest over at Norton, Kansas, and it was name of the solo was "Sing Me a Shanty with a Yo Heave Ho." That's memory for you right there. That's about all I can remember of it. But anyway, I mean, I think all that stuff is good for our youth. I think it builds relationships, which are important. It helps build their self-esteem. And I think, we talk about wrestling. I don't care what activity you're talking about. Those teachers, those coaches who are in charge have a tremendous responsibility.
They do.
And I used to, as the older I got in coaching, the more I used to be aware of what some of the younger coaches, how they were treating their kids and their athletes. And sometimes it just blew me away because it reminded me of the way I was early on. And I used to tell kids, if you were a state champion or a medalist or had success in wrestling, in my first 10 or 15 years of coaching, you were a real stud because you weren't getting coached very well. And I don't have any problem mentioning that. I mean, I look back. I wished I could have. It's like a lot of things in life, Troy. I wished at the end of my career, I could have gone back to the first 15 and done them over with what I know now. I think I'd have done a lot of kids a lot more justice. It'd have been better for them. But, hey, isn't that the way life is?
It is. And sometimes you're your own worst, or not you, but anyone's their own worst critic. You describe it as an illustrious career, and I'm thinking, okay, you're a 4-time champion. You went and you had a full scholarship. You wrestled at Oklahoma State for 4 years. To me, that's not illustrious. You went 4-2 in that second year. I mean, in that tournament, that's so we're our own worst critic. Then you went and you teached all these kids. I mean, sure you'd want to do it over, but think about the lives you changed and the coach, and the coaching and the help you did. So that's all I'm saying. That's
another thing about this business, this education business that I got told too, that early on, is that whether you know it or not, right now you're affecting kids' lives. But you're probably not going to find out about it till way down the road. It might be 40, 50 years later. And I've had a few come back and tell me and say things that really, and I just, it's not like you're going to have 100 people come back and tell you about it. Hey, if it was just one kid, it was worth it all. And I don't know. When I started learning to try to understand what was going on in kids' life, and another thing about being in the sports and activities, another thing I heard one time, and this floored me. I mean, I won't say it about brought me to tears, but it kind of crushed my heart to think about this. But this superintendent stood up there or the speaker, and I think he was I don't know if he's our new superintendent, but he said, "I just want to leave you, teachers, coaches, with this." He said, "For a lot of these kids that you're going to see in the coming weeks, in the coming year, they come into the day, they come into you see them," he said, "being with you, whether it's in a classroom or in the coaching and the football field, wrestling, whatever," he said, "this is going to be the best part of their day."
That's right.
And boy, I mean, that touched me because it was like, holy cow. I mean, I'm thinking best part of the day, all I can think out of is 3:30, I'm out of here, and they're thinking, man, and they're probably thinking, hey, I wish this day would last longer, or just being around, a fun environment. And, another thing too, I was going to say that I learned that really helped out when I started doing encouraging kids more, the success of the program went up, and that's just the way it was. And I had to like I said, my 2 boys taught me an awful lot about how to have fun. And I remember my youngest son telling me, he says, "Dad," he says, you gotta lighten up. He says, "This isn't a life and death matter. We gotta learn to have some fun." I'm like, "Oh, what are you talking about? This is wrestling. This is life and death. This is serious stuff,
Right.
And I'm like, where's this kid coming from? But he had gotten that from my older son, Barrett, who was 2 years older. And then Barrett went away to college and brought a lot of stuff back that I used that helped out. But, Barrett had come up his senior year. And we had a state champion team that year. And that's what I'm really proud of, because we not only had a state wrestling team, we had it on top of the boys won state football in the fall, the previous fall.
That's a good year.
A double year. And that's people who have not been in this don't understand how hard it is to duplicate a championship, because a lot of kids, hey, they got their state championship, they're done. I don't need to go out for wrestling. I had that on several occasions on a successful football season. Kids didn't want to come out. But Barrett, he came up and he says, Dad, we got to figure out how to have more fun in practice. This stuff was foreign to me, And he said, how about if we play some games or do some, and I'm like, good gosh. I said, what is this? I'm turning over a leaf like you can't believe.
But you did. You evolved.
Well, I tried. It took me a little longer than it probably should have. But so we'd go in and I started trying to incorporate some games. And I had to be a little careful because, the guys, boy, they'd get rambunctious. And, sometimes a kid could get hurt if we weren't real careful. But with some of the games we played some little dodgeball games. We played some tag games, just stupid grade school stuff. And kids loved it. And I found out something else. If kids are laughing and smiling,
that's right.
That's a good thing, and they're going to do better.
Yep.
And it never ceased to amaze me. We'd be going along, we'd have this hard practice, we'd be going, or they'd come in, and I'd see how they were drooping and dragging. I knew they were going to do it, but I could see the fire when I said, okay, guys, we've been practicing pretty hard. I said, how about if we do 50 minutes, good hard drilling, and maybe some short wrestling, and you're out of here. All of a sudden they're jumping up, doing back. They got more energy, and you know what, do it. It just, that little things like that I learned. I learned, and another quote that I learned a long time ago, that it wasn't that you got to work harder than the other guy, you got to work smarter. And I heard that from a wrestler who had been an assistant under Dan Gable, who, if anybody knows anything about wrestling, he was incredibly famous. He said, Iowa works hard. They work extremely hard, but they don't work harder than anybody else. They work smarter. And I'm going, gee, why didn't I hear that before type deal? But it took me a long time to incorporate that. So a little story here. So that year, that had been 2002. And this is just a coaching story. This is from my perspective. So we win football that fall. Our kids, and it was brutal. We won some brutal games. One against Eaton, one against Yuma. It was just brutal. And they were outstanding football games. Coach Glenn Higgs was our coach. He was an outstanding coach, too. By the way, he coached wrestling early in his career, too. And he'd never wrestled before. So anyway, we get done with the season. And I'd seen this before when the football had a lot of success. And then, I'm thinking, I'm selfish, Coach Duell. God dang it. Kids aren't going to come out. Kids are going to want to, I knew I need to give them a break because the state championship game was the week before our first tournament. And of course, I want to start out the race. I want to start the season going full speed.
Yep.
And I'll be honest with you, I prayed a lot for guidance because I wasn't a real smart coach, but I forced myself. I told the kids, I started telling them when they went deep into the playoff, get out of my practice room. I don't want to see you here for a week. I knew we were going to get our butt kicks in the first duel in the first tournaments. Mm-hmm. Just the way it was. I wasn't going to have a full team. Kids were injured. We had a lot of injuries. And there were 3 or 4 of the studs, my studs on the wrestling team, who also were studs on the football team. They didn't wrestle till after Christmas. That was so hard for me. And because we were just getting thumped everywhere. So that time off did wonders. They came back. We're looking at a very shortened season. They were able to get in shape. I don't know how. I mean,
it happened.
They worked hard, and we go into the regional tournament. And this is kind of where it started. Well, we won the league that year against a team called Roosevelt. Roosevelt was one of the powerhouses, and it was kind of an upset, but we beat them. And we won the league championship, and it happened to be in Burlington, and, I mean, everybody's going nuts. And I remember gathering them together right over at the edge of the mat, and I said, hey, it's one thing, guys. This is not the end. This is just the beginning. And we still had the regional and the state tournament left. So we go to the regional tournament, and I remember we'd started playing games. And the kids were laughing. They were feeling good. And I didn't know what was going to happen. All I knew is my kids were wrestling well. The kids were wrestling well, and they were having fun. So it's up at Manitou Springs, and the kids, we get in the locker room. We have our team prayer. Shh! Don't tell anybody that. We used to have team prayers on our wrestling team. Did in football too. Anyway, so the kids, they file out of the locker room. I have to spend a moment in the big boys' room, okay?
Yep.
And I look in the mirror to make sure my ties, and I'm looking good and all that kind of stuff. And as I starting to walk, it was kind of a little bit of to get to the mat from where our locker room was. And I started hearing people laughing, and I'm going, what in the Sam Hill is going on?
Uh-oh.
And I walk out around the edge of the mat, and I saw what was going on, so I kind of stayed back because I'm thinking, I don't want people seeing me as a coach of this outfit. The guys were in a circle, I kid you not, and they were playing Duck, Duck, Goose. And the crowd was watching them. All the other teams were watching them like,
what is going on?
These guys are weird. What is going on with these goofballs?
But I bet it turned out okay, didn't it?
Long story short, we kicked the snot out of everybody in that regional. I mean, kids were lights out.
Because they were having fun. They were enjoying it.
They were having fun, and they knew that whatever happened, they were having fun. They felt good about themselves. So then we go into the state tournament, and same thing. They played a Duck, Duck, Goose out there, and people were watching. Like,
you had to let them after that.
Well, yeah, I'm going to stop that. I mean, why mess with a good
No,
thing,
don't mess with it.
So we go into the state tournament that year, and we win. We have it won at the end of the semifinals. We put 5 in the finals, and it was just an interesting. Yeah, we had the horses. There was no doubt about it.
So you guys won state that year?
Yeah,
2002.
2002.
Wow.
But you know, the point I guess I'm making is it wasn't the first time that we had a pretty good team that we didn't do good at state.
Right.
We did this year, and anyway, it was that evolution of trying to figure out how do you have fun and make kids, how do you get them to work and have fun
and
at
still
the
have
same
fun.
time? How do you make hard work fun? You know.
You know what's interesting about that is it makes sense now. Obviously, Logan's over at Pee Wee Wrestling and Barrett's coaching him, and he incorporates that. Yeah. And you see all those little kids, and there was a good turnout, I thought, last year. That it was pretty full, and they were all having fun. He has them playing the games, and Logan, I'd ask him, hey, do you want to go wrestle? Yeah. He didn't want to miss. He did not want to miss practice.
Well, it's like any kind of play. If kids are playing at something they're having fun with,
but learning,
they'll do it. I mean, you'll have to say, "Hey, it's midnight. Time to come in and go to bed. We need to stop this now." But and they're learning a little bit around. I always felt like the Pee Wee levels, the youth levels should. And I don't have all the answers on this. I just think there's got to be a way for kids to have fun. When is it? And the thing is, you can get as serious as you want, and it's not just in wrestling. It is in any youth sport. I don't care if it's basketball, football, softball, soccer. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you want, you can get your kid on a team and travel across the United States at 6 and 7 years old of age.
It's getting serious.
Is that good?
No.
I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of...
It's turned into a money-making apparatus, too.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're talking about $100,000 up in Denver to send your kids on a basketball.
So, and I always say that, you know, wrestling is a little different in the sense that you could be part of a program, but yet you could still go off and do as much extra stuff as you want. Now, in a team sport, you can't really do that. You've got to have the whole team to go do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got mixed feelings about that. I think parents need to study up on the data. There's a lot of data out there about injuries to youths at the junior high and high school level because they've already been doing this stuff for so long. And I'm talking about organized, controlled, directed practices and competitions. That's a little different than playing.
And what I meant when I said 100,000 is there are teams that and organizations where coaches are running outfits, and they're bringing in a lot of money.
It's big.
It didn't cost each kid 100,000, but when you look at the totality of what they're all paying in all these different groups, and they're going all around. It's competitive, and this is at age 9, 10.
We've got several friends up in the Denver, North Denver metro area that have wrestling clubs, and they charge a pretty good fee.
Mm-hmm.
They're making a good living doing that, and it's a business. But ultimately, I think parents have to be on top of that. I think there's a lot that goes into that. We want our kids to be the best. How much is that going to cost? How do you know what your kid's going to be at 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 years old?
Right.
I mean,
you remember Todd Marinovich? That whole story.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You don't want that either.
No.
I mean,
and so what is that from? Is that because he started to, or is that because he got pushed and pressured by his parents to?
Both.
I've seen kids burn out. They got tired of it. What is that from? I don't know. I've seen kids start late and do very good. I think there's a fine line there sometimes. I mean, I think parents in some cases are afraid. They're afraid if I don't get my kid involved, they're going to fall behind. They're not going to do as good, I don't believe that. Man, we could spend hours on this. I think though, when I see some of the statistics of kids in high school and even in college who are suffering, there are more injuries, joint injuries now than there ever used to be, because kids have been doing it a lot longer. It's just common sense,
Even
like
even pitchers, their arms are burning out.
Oh,
and so,
absolutely. And like I said, I started competitive wrestling in 7th grade. Kids now have more matches by the time they're in 4th grade than I had my whole junior high, high school, and college career combined. That's how crazy it can get.
I didn't know that.
You can go. You can wrestle almost every weekend of the year. But you can do the same thing with soccer, field hockey, regular ice hockey. It's unbelievable. And you're right. These sporting apparel companies are making huge money off this, because let's face it. You take the number of kids in say a particular youth sport. Let's just say youth baseball or youth football. Now I know football's kind of going the other direction now with all this concussion stuff, but you take the number of individuals involved there, and then you compare it to the number of individuals that are involved at the college and then the pros. There's a vast. They're not making as much money on the pros selling equipment as they are to those youth kids down there. And hey, I'm not going to sit here and tell somebody it's wrong. I'm just telling you, people, that they need to get educated and take a look at this kind of stuff. And that's why, I felt like when I started the wrestling program here, I was in charge of everything, because that's just the way it had to be. Nobody else was doing it. I mean, I started the Pee-wee and the junior high and the high school. There was times I was doing that all in one evening or afternoon, just because I thought that it had to be done. I always tried to make the Pee-wees fun. I didn't really care if they were state champions at 9 years of age. I was more hoping they'd carry on and be a state champion when they were 16 or 17 or 18.
Right.
And that was just my philosophy. Some people are different. There are some kids that will benefit from getting more intense at an earlier age. What's the age to get your kid, send him off to 3 or 4 weeks of camp a summer? I can't tell you that for sure. I don't know what that is. I think it's different for every kid. I think there's a lot of peer pressure sometimes from, kids as buddies. Oh, I'm doing this. I'm going to 3 camps. So you want to come with me? Well,
yeah.
Sometimes you get caught up in that. I think it has to be looked at.
Well, and everything could change now. I mean,
Oh,
there's going to be,
and
this
so-
is not only professional sports, collegiate
Yeah,
sports,
yeah.
high school sports. It's all going to be different. We
What
have to
that's
see
going to
that-
mean, I have no idea.
Me
I
neither.
can't even
No.
comprehend that. And I was going to throw another side note. So I talk about this when I started and having fun and what my two boys did. I've got a sister that lives in Tulsa. She has 4 boys and 2 girls. And they're all pretty active. The 4 boys are absolutely insanely involved in wrestling. And they are going all over. And
all over the country, or
well, the older ones are going across the country doing stuff, and they love it. They're in a big club in Tulsa. They're getting well coached.
so
I don't know what the answer
I hear
is.
you.
I don't on that. And maybe it's now wrestling might have an advantage, individual sports, where there might be some things to be able to get done through a club process that maybe other sports can't,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what this is going to mean for college sports. Maybe there won't be a college.
Oh, I see what you're saying because of COVID and the physical contact.
Because
and,
of all this.
well, yeah, I didn't even think about that. If they're all tested and you have the 2 going out and they both come back and they're okay,
Well,
I mean, you could.
Yeah, but I just, in my mind, I don't comprehend
The
where this
other-
is going to end.
Yeah, and the other thing with wrestling is you can do this without a crowd.
You can, yeah.
It's not this.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I hadn't even thought about that. But there were times when I go to a wrestling meet and it was just, we had great times. We had our food packed up in the stands.
Yeah.
We're all eating, and we're at pack meets, and parents were there, but it wasn't a big crowd. We weren't dependent on that like I think football is, and basketball and baseball.
And like I said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, you hear factions out there talking about the new America, we're going to do. I don't. If that means maybe that means we're not going to
reality.
Maybe that means we're not going to have college sports. I know one thing. I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if we don't have college football as we know it, there's a lot of these smaller sports that are going to get dropped by the wayside, and I think wrestling would be one of them. And,
I hope you're wrong about that.
I mean, I'm just saying because
so much of the revenue. Well, they might have to change the revenue model or how it works.
Wrestling's a non-revenue sport, and there's a lot of women's sports that would get cut too. So anyway, I don't know.
Okay, so we're going to do some Burlington history then.
We're going to get into a little bit of Burlington wrestling history, and I may or may not be the best one to do this. I can think of several people who I wish were here to help me out because I'm going to be a little wrong on some of my
Who are you thinking of?
dates. Well, so starting out, my dad came here, Ben Duell, became the coach in like 1960 or 61 or 2, somewhere, and I'm not sure the exact year. There was a guy that had coached 1 or 2 years before that. My dad had a little bit of wrestling experience. He came back to this area because he wanted to get a little closer to the farm so he could do his farming. And so he started the program got the program going. And it became evident really early on, he set his sights on beating Ray and Coach Bob Smith. And anybody that knows anything about Colorado wrestling history knows what a big deal that was. At that time, Ray was the top wrestling school in the state, all classes. They were good, and Bob Smith did an incredible job up there. I have the utmost amount of respect for this guy. And so, anyway, it took several years. Dad got the program going, and at the same time, he was raising a family, and we lived over in Ruleton. So as Burlington slowly climbed the ladder, I remember I spoke earlier about my brother and I wrestling, and Gary Rhodes and Bryce Monsman and Darryl wrestling at events, dual matches from other schools. I looked into some of my dad's old school scorebooks one time, years ago, and I found scores like a Rickery, 72, Burlington 3, Hugo, 55, Burlington 12,
A Rickery.
Rickery, Woodland, 78, Burlington, 0. I mean,
Jeez.
And back then, that it really is some history, because back then, wrestling programs had 12 weights, okay? And all of these schools, people know what I'm talking about, where they were at. They were out in the middle of nowhere, but they were rural schools. And every one of these schools had 2 and 3 full teams of 12 wrestlers, and then there were always some exhibitions or extra kids to get matches. So that tells you a little bit of how our population evolved over the years. I mean, as time went on, farms got to where, Troy, where the machinery got bigger, the tractors got bigger, they didn't need as many hired hands, and so and kids didn't want to come back to the farm, so those places shrunk. But really interesting to look back on that time and that era. I remember Hugo. I remember wrestling in the Hugo gym as a little kid, and Hugo, gosh, I mean, they used to beat the tar out of Burlington. So they climbed the ladder, they began beating those teams, and then finally they began placing second and third in the state tournament. In 73 and 74, they won the state tournament and beat Ray out. The big thing, though, that I think I'd like to remind everybody is Ray had like a, gosh, I know I'm going to blow this now, 64 or something, 68 match win streak, I think. And Burlington finally beat them and stopped that winning streak one night. And back in those days, whether you were at the Ray or the Burlington gym, when those two teams wrestled, there would be literally standing room only, if even that. I mean, there was no way they were within fire codes, I'll guarantee you. But that's how intense and how big that rivalry was. And there'll be some people probably here this will remember that. And, I mean, it's hard to imagine because that doesn't happen anymore. But every stand, every seat in the stands in the Burlington gym would be packed. People would be standing up around the edges. Unbelievable. And so it's quite an electric atmosphere. But so Burlington finally accomplished that. And then a couple of names I'd rattle off. Ron Ruzick, first Burlington finalist, got second his senior year. Norm Penny was Burlington's first state champion.
Wow.
Daryl Monosmith, as I mentioned before, was Burlington's, well, I guess he was a second 3-time state champion. That year, Doug Thompson was also a 3-time state champion. Man, I know I'm going to miss some names. Jerry Harrell was a state champion for Burlington. We go right on down the list. Rick Trahern was 2-time state champion.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah. And so I wished I had some of my buddies my age to help me remember all this. So then Mike Hendricks, 2-time state champion.
Wow, I didn't know there was that many. That's a lot of state champions.
Well, if you go up in the wrestling room, they've done a pretty good job of putting up a board to list those.
Yeah, and I've looked at them.
It's a neat piece of history when you recognize those names. People you'd never, think, Stan Hitchcock, state runner-up. You just go all down like George Hom, third in state.
George Hom, third. I think my father-in-law.
Your father-in-law wrestled. I can't remember if he placed.
He took either third or second. I think
he took
second?
Third. Yeah,
third. Okay.
Yeah. So and so that's really interesting to look back on that and say, hey, I knew that guy or that guy, and I know I'm leaving a lot of people off, but so then my dad he retired in, I think, the fall of 76, I believe. He got out because he wanted to spend more time farming. He'd had enough teaching, coaching. He wanted to come watch. My brother had also decided to go down to Oklahoma State to come watch us wrestle. So then in between there were several other coaches. And then I became the coach in the fall of, took up my teaching job in the fall of 84. So, anyway, The first state champion that I coached was in '86. Galen Durham runs Durham Ag Tech.
I've heard. I've heard what a good wrestler he is, too.
He was, yeah. You wouldn't want to tangle with him.
That's what I heard.
He's getting kind of old. You might want to tangle with him.
I saw him. I don't know if I'd want to tangle with him.
I hope he's listening.
Hopefully he helped make our sign out front.
Oh, did he?
Yeah,
well,
he helped us with the braces.
He done a great job. I mean, I look around town. Eric Richardson, state runner-up.
Okay,
wow. He was a few years behind. A couple other people that were significant at that time. There's a guy named Ray Rhodes, and Ray got involved in the wrestling. He never wrestled, but he became a wrestling official and was an outstanding official. He refereed a lot of junior colleges back when there were junior colleges on every corner and everyone had a wrestling program. All three of his boys wrestled. Gary, a good friend of mine, was a year younger than me. His youngest son, Jay, was a really good wrestler for me, was a 3-time placer, 2-time runner-up. His daughter, Judy, was a mat maid for my dad and then helped when we got our wrestling club formed. So when I came to Burlington, I still really had no idea what I was doing. And I got here and I thought, I didn't take a job just to collect a salary. I wanted to, I was a little bit competitive. I wanted to win championships. And maybe it was misguided at the time, but so I thought, okay, we need a Pee Wee Wrestle Club. And I'm asking around and I'm hoping somebody will step up and say, yeah, I've done that before. I'll do this. Well, that never happened. There were a lot of people that wanted to help. And so I basically just dove in and I said, okay, we're going to have a Pee Wee Wrestle Program. This is when I'm going to run it. And we did it over at the old grade school starting out. I had 2 sessions. Then it became evident that we needed to have a club. We need to form a club.
Right.
So we had and we need to have a tournament. What good's going to have practice? Kids can't wrestle in a tournament. And so things took off from there. And over the years, a lot of different people stepped in to help. It's amazing how the people in this community, incredible how they stepped up and people stepped up and helped out. Over the years, I had some incredible assistants. I've been to award ceremonies and whatever where, guys get awards for being a good coach's assistant for, 50 years. Wow. I never had that, but I did have every time I needed an assistant, I got good ones, and I was really blessed in that respect. It really helped the program out, some really good ones. And so anyway.
So how many years were you coach? 84 till
I retired in 2012 was my last year.
Oh, wow. That's not that long ago.
I coached 28 years, yeah.
28.
Some people would say that was, hey, I'll be honest with you. There were people that were upset that I got out. There were people that were cheering when I got out. There were people that thought I should have got out a long time ago. But that's the way with everything, right? That's the way it is in everything.
Yeah.
And
how many state champions over that course?
We had 3 state champion teams. I think 16 or 18 individual state champions. It was it was a good go here. And
that was a good run.
Good support. We formed this wrestling club and we started, I don't even know how to get into this, Troy, but we formed our club, and part of the deal for forming the club is, okay, we charge an entry fee to get into our tournament. So we had to have something to do with money. We weren't going to just give it to the school. That didn't seem right.
Okay.
And so, and I wouldn't knock the school. It's just, hey, we earned this. Our people earned this. I'm thinking, okay, we can take that money. We can maybe buy some stuff for the kids, new uniforms, whatever. So one thing led to another. One thing led to evolved. We learned. Our wrestling program ended up, at one time, we were probably, bringing in the neighborhood of 15 to 25,000 a year, just because But we spent it. We spent it.
Of
We
course.
bought wrestling mats. We bought uniforms. We did about, it was about, man, now we have money.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that if our kids were going to represent Burlington, they needed to look good and look sharp. And so that's what we did.
Good.
So we spent it on the wrestling program. And I can personally say I didn't ever take a dime out of that.
Right.
I didn't get paid for doing that part. Some people probably would have. Some people maybe thought that should have been. I wanted to keep it as clean as possible. I think I did grab a stick of beef jerky free one time off a rack that the wrestling club had.
I think that they'll be okay.
Well, hey, whatever. I'm just fessing up. But anyway, and it was incredible. We ended up with a thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but we had what were called. We had a Cajun boil and mouse races.
Yeah.
And it was the craziest thing. And I'll be honest, when it was first brought to my attention that this might be something we want to do, I said, there's no way. That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard of.
And now it's tradition, right?
Well, it was. I don't know if they're still doing it, to be honest with you. I've kind of lost a little bit of touch. But it turned into an incredible fundraiser for us. And I'll be right up front and tell you it was. It was Mark and Denise Keir brought it back from her hometown. That they'd gone up there to participate in town days or whatever. I don't remember the name of the town. And Mark come back and he says, and I said, you need to take a look at this. You need to consider, Mark wrestled for me years ago too. And he said, you need to take a look at this. And I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, Peter will come in, they'll put us in jail, we'll be mistreating mouses. I said, this won't work around here. He said, I just think you need to.
Thank you, Mark. Good job, Mark.
I just think you need to maybe take a look at it. I said, And I got a little pressure from some other people. I think Eric Richardson and some other people started putting pressure. Hey, we need to take a look at it. Mark says it'll work. Is it?
Yeah.
So I said, okay, fine. I'll help. I'll be a part of it. And so they put that thing on. And
that's awesome.
And after one time, we adjusted some things and made some things a little better. And I'm like, after the first time, I said, okay, guys, we need to keep doing this. This is okay.
This is working.
But what it was is we figured out it worked great because we didn't have to go out and try to sell people something. We were saying, look, this is what we're offering. You want to come to our show? Here's tickets. And we actually had to get to the point we had to limit tickets because we couldn't, we only had so many we could have in the old, where the old dish room that people used to run it were. Mm-hmm. And people had a good time. And they I'm probably opening up a can of worms, but they got to bet on the mice. I'm trying to think how we even set that up.
Oh, no, not that.
People would buy the mice.
Right.
And I remember one time somebody paid I think $4,500 for a stupid mouse that they knew nothing about, that they'd never seen before. They didn't even know if the stupid thing was going to run or have a heart attack 2 inches out of the gate. And
it won?
I don't remember if it won. I'm just sitting there thinking, why would anybody do? But
it's because of the cost. They knew where it was going.
And that's an interesting thing too. And I've said this many times. And I'm going to speak a little bit on emotion maybe, but people thought, people love, if they're going to spend money, they want to know where their money's going. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yeah, I'll give where's this money going that I'm going to give? And they said, well, it might go here, it might go. No, they knew that it was going to go right into the wrestling program. And they wanted to support that. So that's what happened. Plus, they were getting some good fun, some good, clean entertainment. And at that time, it was the only show in town when we had it. So it was like, there's not a lot to do in Burlington, Colorado. And I even tried to explain this to one of my college coaching friends. And I said, I guarantee it'd work, but I said at a college the authorities might step in and this was in Oklahoma. But I said, I'm telling you, people went nuts over this stuff, and so we had a good success.
You could get away at a college,
and we were able to do things and help the program. I think that helped. The bottom line is you can do more with money than you can without money. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it sure helped. And anyway, that's kind of a long part of that story, but. Anyway, that evolved into that, and we had a really strong wrestling club for probably 10, 12 years. it was fun. That was hard to leave. And when I, like I said, some people were happy when I left. Some people weren't when I decided to retire. I had to tell people, I said, it was hard because I was leaving kids, and when you leave in the middle, but
it's never going to be a good time.
No, it's never going to be a good time.
You're always going to be leaving somebody in the middle.
My dad was starting to get ill, and I needed to spend more time on the farm, and I just had to run that show. And I told people, I said, I'm sorry, but I said my goal was never to die in the center of a wrestling mat. So, I knew when it was time to get out. And
do you miss it?
There are some things I miss. I get kind of excited talking about the wrestling club and what we did and how seeing people come together and stuff like that. I miss seeing kids have success and helping kids achieve something that they may never not thought they were possible. Having kids achieve their potential. Winning was fun, but it was also a lot of hard work. And it just didn't happen, There was a lot of time and effort, and people don't realize how much time goes into a head coaching position, or even an assistant, how much time is involved. You don't just, show up for the matches. I mean, it takes a lot of work, and it was just, I don't miss, one of the things is I got tired of going to practice. I've been going to a wrestling practice for the majority of my life. I just didn't want to go to practice anymore. I'd had enough of it. And I do miss working with kids and thinking I had maybe a small effect on some of them, and the challenges that but I didn't miss going to practice every day, and I guess I didn't miss all the hard work that went into. I knew that that's what had to be done, but man, again, I had for me personally, I had a lot of tremendous amount of help along the way. And so then, they had several coaches that in the meantime, which since I retired, they've done good. It wasn't the same. It wasn't going to be. And, when you change names, there's going to be difference. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Right.
I didn't expect anybody to be Doug Duell. I tried early in my career to be like some other coaches, and that's probably one of the reasons it took me so long to figure things out. I'd go to a clinic, and I'd come up, I'm going to teach it. This is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to do it. Well, it was just because it was a different clinician. It took me a while to figure out, okay, what do I believe in? What do I think we need to work on the most? What needs to be the fundamental teachings? And so the young man that's in charge now is Josh McCants, and he's a Nebraska native. I know he wrestled at Chadron State, and he's doing a good job. I see a few of the things that maybe he struggles a bit with that I did. And, with some of the things, too, it's a little bit like being a parent. I mean, you can read all the books you want, go to all the clinics, listen to people, but you've got to get in the fire. You've got to get – there's something called experience that there's only one way to get.
Experience.
Anyway, it was a good run. I'm thankful for the community of Burlington. They gave me the opportunity to do that, and a couple other little history things that and I'm not going to remember all of them, but I was very blessed to get to coach my own two sons. I mean, I was one of those kind. I don't know if I would have. Could somebody else done it better? Possibly. There was friction there with time and again, just because the coach was in practice and the coach was at home. But I also learned a lot from him. I'm thankful for that. A lot of coaches, it was challenging, but I was, like I said, I never was one to back down too much from a challenge. I never knew when I was whipped, so I always kept trying to plug ahead. A couple of things come to mind. One of my former wrestlers that he actually changed sports as a junior. He wanted to play basketball, and that was fine. I had learned by that time I didn't want to, I wasn't going to harbor any ill feelings. But this kid, his name is Logan Hines. His mom is a post. She carries mail around.
Okay.
Anyway, we go up to a tournament. Long story short, we go to a tournament in I think it was Pueblo, and he wrestles a guy named he draws a guy named Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo was a 4-time state champion. He won 2 in Arizona, then he moved to Colorado and won 2. He moved so he could be close to the Olympic Training Center. He goes from high school to the Olympic Training Center. Never wrestled in college. He went straight into the freestyle, the international style, right? He becomes an Olympic champion.
Wow.
He then gets out of, retires and gets into the MMA and has won 2 world MMA titles at 2 different weights, a dual title. And it's like, yeah, we got to wrestle against a guy like that.
Yeah.
He's pretty famous.
Logan did, right?
Yeah,
Logan Hines.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. Trying to think. I mean, I know I'm forgetting a lot when it comes to the history, but that early history of Burlington, establishing Burlington wrestling, there's a lot of names that could be brought up there.
Well, and I think it would be cool to, like you said, to get a couple of these guys to come back at some point. You come back and bring over maybe Gary and somebody else and sit down and tell us some stories.
Well, it's history of Burlington. I've lived here almost 40, not quite 40 years. My connection with Burlington starts way back when my dad started. I remember he'd always tell me when I got in high school, he said, man, you ought to let me fix you up with one of these Burlington girls over here. But I couldn't go across state line and ask a girl out on a date, man. I wouldn't do that. But anyway, it was, so there's a long history there, and with the Rhodes family and several other families too,
It's pretty cool to look back on it, right? And that your sons are going to be able to watch this. And I mean, it's, there's passion there, you can tell, and a legacy.
Yeah. We could, cover all the state champions. I mean, there were, I'm glad you didn't ask me who was my best wrestler or who was my toughest wrestler, or I would hate to have to go. You don't want to have shot.
It's a culmination of body of work, and
I've seen coaches have to do that, and it's tough. I mean, you end up.
I don't see what it gains. I mean, I just want to hear more about the history and explain, what's happened over the years and get your take. And then we'll have you back to talk about the pipeline later on.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think today we've gone almost 2.5 hours.
I can guarantee you one thing. You're going to have to edit it because nobody's going to
there won't be much. We won't do much editing.
Nobody's going to listen to me for 2 hours. They're going to see that and say, this is the longest one yet.
You'd be surprised.
Surprise.
You'd be surprised. So, but thanks a lot for coming in.
Well,
I
thanks
really
for having me.
it. They're great stories. And it's the hardest I've laughed. So.
I enjoyed this, and it's been fun. Like I said, I'm not. I wouldn't consider myself a great speaker, even a good speaker. But man, do I love to talk when I get on something that's passionate. And then wrestling was a huge part of my life for a long time. I mean, it just was.
Yeah,
that's what I did. I didn't know anything else.
And that's why I wanted you in here.
Yeah,
people that have true passion about things are who we want to talk to.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun, and I look forward to
the next one.
If you get good reviews, I'll come back. If they want to.
Good reviews, bad reviews.
Don't have me back.
We're bringing you back. All right.
Very good.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
All right. See you.
Okay.